Wonderful, and thank you for that, Deepak. And it's great to be here with you all this afternoon. If you had the opportunity to listen to the prior panel, you heard directly from the source, the agencies that are providing a lot of the grants and funding that's available to our entrepreneurial community here in the U.S. And so I see this next panel, the next 50 minutes that we have together here, as a real opportunity to hear directly from some of the recipients of those funding. We're privileged today to be joined by 4 incredibly accomplished and successful entrepreneurs that have been able to incorporate some of these sources of federal funding into their entrepreneurial journey. And we'll have some time to hear directly from them on how they first encountered some of these sources of funding and how they were able to use these sources of funding in their journey and to achieve the success that they have. So I'm incredibly privileged to be joined today by our 4 entrepreneurs, and I'll invite them now to introduce themselves. And if we could start with Samantha Snabes, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to represent Re3D. We are a small business that has benefited from multiple agency SBIRs and STTRs that were highlighted in the last talk to take our large, affordable, think size of a toilet, as big as your budget printers, that print from the rope-like filament we call, or the rope-like material we call filament in virgin recycled materials, and now also to be able to print from pellets like you see here, or flake, such as a ground up water bottle. So we have 3 ways now to print directly from plastic waste. And thanks to many of the resources provided by the federal government, we've been able to make that happen as an open source company and as a social enterprise that's bootstrapped. So thank you to everyone on this panel that's been part of building that infrastructure. And yeah, we're looking forward to sharing our experiences as a U.S. small manufacturer.
Great, wonderful. Thank you for that, Samantha. Suzanne Borders.
Hello, everyone. I'm Suzanne Borders. I'm the CEO and co-founder of BadVR. Over at BadVR, we're taking really large, complex data sets and putting them into virtual and augmented reality, with the goal being to make the discovery of insights faster, easier, and most importantly, universally accessible to everyone. We believe that there is a bandwidth issue between the data sets of the world and people's ability to work with them and understand it. So we're aiming to remove that bandwidth by increasing access to non-technical people. So by presenting data in interfaces that are very easy to use, easy to understand, we want to expand the group or the number of people that can actually engage with the world's data sets by presenting it in a way that doesn't require a bunch of technical training or technical degrees to engage with that data or to understand it, just making that whole process much easier and more effective. My background is in product and UX design. Prior to founding BadVR, I spent about a decade designing data interfaces for 2D data sets, and also designing interfaces and products for people who were non-technical. So a large majority of data products are really aimed towards data analysts, and I've been very blessed to be able to work on and design products that are geared towards everybody else. Originally from Kansas City, Missouri. I'm now based here in Los Angeles, and I'm incredibly honored to be a part of this panel. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Suzanne. I'd like to introduce Eric Adolfi now. Eric.
Hi, Eric Adolfi here in Palau, Micronesia. It's time now is 3 a.m. Happy to be here. I'm the senior citizen, I think, of the group. Been in SBIR for the better past, I think, 33 years. It's a 40-year-old program. Got my first SBIR. I was with NASA. Didn't think that this was going to be something terribly difficult. Little I knew. Submitted a proposal and won, surprisingly. And I've been principal investigator on SBIRs for just about every agency except for EPA, Department of Energy, and DARPA. I'm currently a National Science Foundation SBIR Phase 2 PI. I'm also the first African-American SBIR Tibbetts Award winner. And this is my fourth company, actually. And I am in the APAC region selling my SBIR products. We have an SBIR product around cybersecurity, detecting fraud and cyber attacks. And we just actually are signing a deal with the government of Palau to provide our technology to protect their infrastructure. They're moving towards a digital or crypto economy. So they're going to be using our software to protect their infrastructure. So excited to be here. I usually have a little bit more energy. I'll try to pick it up, but really excited to be here and share what I know. Thank you.
And a special thank you to Eric for setting that alarm clock extra early this morning and sharing your journey with us. I think we've all got a lot to learn from your background and looking forward to diving into it. And our fourth panelist today is Dr. Adil Akhtar.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you all. So I'm Adil Akhtar. I'm the CEO and founder of Psionic. We develop advanced bionic limbs that are affordable and accessible for everyone. This is something I've wanted to do ever since I was 7 years old. My parents were from Pakistan. I was visiting. It's the first time I met someone with a limb difference. She was my age, missing her right leg and using a tree branch as a crutch, living in poverty. So it inspired me to go into the field, got a bachelor's in biology from Loyola University of Chicago, a master's in computer science there, and then taught there for a couple of years before going down to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I got another master's in electrical engineering and then a PhD in neuroscience. And while I was doing grad school, we got the chance to go down to Quito, Ecuador, and try out an early version of our bionic hand on a patient who had lost his left hand 35 years prior due to machine gun fire from a helicopter. And he was able to make a pinch with his left hand for the first time in 35 years. And that's what inspired me to, instead of going the academic route, to actually try and commercialize this technology so that everyone could feel the exact same way that our patient Juan did. Then in the U.S., our first user of our hand was a U.S. Army sergeant who lost his hand in Iraq in 2005. And with the ability hand that we've made, it's the first hand that allows users to feel. So Sergeant Anderson can actually feel his daughter's hand when he's holding it. That was something that was really important to us, and making this technology more accessible than ever. So we released this hand nationwide in September of last year. And we've gotten several SBIR awards from the National Science Foundation. Currently in the middle of 2 Phase 2 awards right now, and excited to be here and answer all of the questions. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all, and just incredibly inspiring stories. And I'd love to do a little bit of a deeper dive into each of your stories now, and really kind of frame this from the perspective of, you need to be aware of some of these sources of funding that are out there, right, before you can, really kind of take that next step. So maybe I'd like to start with Suzanne. I think a lot of people lack that basic awareness, or really don't know where to look for where some of these sources of government grants and funding are. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about how you encountered some of these grants and which ones that you were able to take advantage of, and what made you aware of them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So sort of starting from the top, my company has had grants from several, SBIR grants specifically, from several different organizations, one of them being the National Science Foundation for the Phase 1, a Phase 2, NOAA, a Phase 1 and Phase 2, and then we have a cooperative agreement with NIST. So the way that I actually found out about all of this is quite sort of serendipitous, I guess. I had a friend who knew somebody who had received a SBIR, an NSF SBIR Phase 1. And he was sort of telling me about it. And as I was founding my business, I was thinking about how I wanted to obviously capitalize it, how I wanted to fund it. And as I was going through that process, most people with technology companies sort of go that venture capital route, but I had worked at a few startups and I had seen, some of the downsides of venture capital raises. So, one of them obviously being diluting yourself as an owner and all of that. So I was just sort of interested in exploring other options. And one of my friends had said, hey, I know someone who had received these SBIR grants, specifically the seed fund from the National Science Foundation. Maybe you should meet up and have a talk with him. And I did, and it was really interesting, and it inspired me to think, just my brain to start down that path, right? And to think about grants as a source of funding for my company, especially because we were doing things that were so cutting edge and so kind of wild and crazy that some of the other, funding sources maybe didn't see that, the value in it initially. And then also it ended up, oddly enough, that once I knew about the NSF SBIRs, I started asking the rest of my network, and it turned out that my cousin had actually received an NSF SBIR phase 1 and 2 as well. So he was also able to tell me more about the process, to really walk me through it, to give me a lot of information about it. So, and then lastly, my father actually went to Caltech and has a PhD, and he also has received a bunch of grants in his life. So I was, in a high level and a broad sense, aware of grants primarily from my father, but then specifically the SBIR one, as I said, I heard about it through my friend, and then of course secondarily through my cousin. Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things where, I think I just hadn't really fully thought through the process of that could be available. I just thought in many senses that grants were for, academic research. I didn't realize that they were also, applicable in a startup situation as well. So.
And that's a great point, Suzanne. And I'd like to maybe go to Eric next on this issue, right? And when we think about grants, we think about them flowing through academia a lot of the time. But Eric, if you could share with us from your perspective, especially as an entrepreneur, a small business owner, kind of a serial entrepreneur, what are some of the grants and what has been kind of your process through going through SBIR and maybe some of the other grants that Susan touched on that I think you would want our audience to be aware of, specifically from that perspective as a serial entrepreneur?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So I want to distinguish between open topic and sort of closed topic, I guess I'm going to call them. The participating SBIR agencies vary, right? So some are open topic, which means you bring your own idea, and some will have topics that you actually respond to. That's a very important, distinction. And when I began my sort of SBIR journey, I was actually, again, this shows you how old I am. They used to circulate these orange books with the SBIR topics in there. And somebody put it on my desk, and I saw this topic for NASA. This was after the Space Shuttle Challenger accident. And I went home that evening and I was watching Star Trek. This is a true story. And there was a scene where there's some battle damage, and it just occurred to me that was the solution to the Shuttle Challenger accident. And I went and wrote the proposal and submitted it. And nobody told me I couldn't win, and I think that was key. And I won. That was my first, and people kind of shocked about that. And then I sort of had a knack for it, and I've been writing SBIRs for different agencies. But the important thing is, for me, lately, I've been, instead of focusing on the topics the agencies publish, I've been sort of bringing my own ideas, right? So I'm very sort of strategic about what I'm doing. So I had an idea for a specific product or technology. So I went to the National Science Foundation, which is open topic, right? Also within the DoD, you have AFWorks, which has what's called Blue Sky, which is also open topic. So I'm really focused on identifying agencies and targeting contracts and SBIR grants that are open topic that allow me to basically express my own ideas. And I think that's important as an entrepreneur. So I'm building companies around my own vision, the technologies I think are going to make an impact, and focus on that versus something that someone in the agency in a research lab comes up with, and then you got to sort of compete with their own ideas and competition, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to distinguish those two, and that's really it. A last point is I've been a peer reviewer 3 times, and I know probably some of you have as well. I think that's very important for you to volunteer to be a peer reviewer. That gives you a sense of how the agencies, review and make decisions. So I've done that for National Science Foundation, been invited to NIH to do peer reviews as well, probably going to do that. So if you really want to understand how these things work, volunteer as a peer reviewer.
That's a great tip, Eric, and I think a great distinction to make too between the types, the open and closed calls there. So I'd like to bring the question of intellectual property and the role that intellectual property may play in the likelihood of success as you're navigating these processes. And maybe we'll go to Samantha for this question. Samantha, in your introduction, you mentioned that you're primarily an open source company now, and I think you've got some experience perhaps in the past on IP intensive companies. So you really kind of bring both points of view to this conversation on the role of IP and the likelihood of obtaining government grants. So can you talk us to a little bit about what role IP has played and maybe what role open source has played in your journey through navigating the federal grant environment?
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to share maybe a less traveled path in these conversations, particularly with USPTO. For context, this is my second venture. I've had the privilege of co-funding, and the first one we did pursue 3 patents, and it was great. It was a life science venture. That's how things are done, and it was very instrumental into our acquisition during the last recession. In this go round, Re3D, if you hear of our story, we shamelessly like to tell it to everybody. At some point, it was kind of like another accidental venture, and really it was a team of peers from NASA and Engineers Without Borders that was more of a club and had this vision for helping humanity. So from the get-go, the ability to have accessibility to 3D printers and to our technology was really important. And one model that we saw for accomplishing that was by making the hardware open hardware. And there's been many other companies that have pursued that trajectory as well. And some have maintained it and some have decided later maybe that wasn't the best strategy for them. But that's the path we've taken. For us, having had 3 patents before, and the other, 2 other pillars that make our company a little bit odd sometimes is being a social enterprise and bootstrapped, means we have not a lot of resources and we're accountable to a lot of people in our journey that have a lot of feedback for us. And having had a company previously, I am very cognizant of the resources it can take to file for multiple patents and also to litigate them. So we determined that with our limited resources, a better use of our funds might be to just try to continue to accelerate the technology. If anyone's 3D printed, and I suspect Dr. Akhtar has, everyone has a lot of feedback on, speed or ways that the technology can be better. And that's a huge part of our competitive strategy and our positioning. So for us, we decided, let's put everything we have into just trying to make this technology more accessible and better, so more people can use it. The other opportunity that provided for us was by opening things up, all of our customers. So we were funded by Kickstarter, which is another funding mechanism that pairs well with SBIRs. I encourage everyone to take advantage of. Our Kickstarter campaign, the first one, gave us $250,000 and in 24 hours put us in 23 countries. So we were a global company from the day we launched our product. By being open source from the beginning, because we didn't know what we were doing, we weren't expecting to have that extension before we even had our factory. that allowed all of our first gen customers to be invited to co-develop and to figure out the challenges that we were likely going to have together. So I would say, in short, it's a long-winded answer, I think what's helpful for us in thinking about the two companies is, and the two different experiences I've had in my limited experience as an entrepreneur, is if you have a broad-based technology where it's highly competitive and is changing rapidly, it may be a useful strategy to consider. That being said, we have trademarked all of our hardware and our name and our tagline as people were borrowing it. And that's been interesting because we even have US companies sometimes using our name or our tagline or our content. So it gives us a leg to stand on in terms of showing our value when we compete for opportunities like SBIRs and other grants that, you know, we have a brand and, you know, we're organized. But even within that, you know, right now we are recognizing that we may have to litigate for a couple of those. So just know that, you know, there's a one-time fee, there's filing fees. You have to do it for more than one country. And you have to be willing to defend it and then deciding if that fits in your strategy. You know, there's funding opportunities we've competed for because we lack IP, sometimes in scoring that can limit our rank. And there's been other times we've been rewarded for it. So at the end of the day, I think co-founders just have to go together and think about the long-term vision for their hardware and their strategy for success and decide for themselves. But I'm happy to have a beer or coffee or talk to anyone offline that's trying to decide if they should be open source or not and how much, because that's another conversation. Just know there's no right answers.
Thank you for that, Samantha. Right, there's always going to be those resource constraints at the heart of that decision making, and that's why I think it's incredibly valuable to talk through these issues. And the goal should not be just to get a patent, right? The goal should be to see if a patent fits or how a patent would fit within your business strategy, and pursue a patent that's going to give you that opportunity to support the business, not just to check a box and to say that I've got some IP. So maybe along those lines, I'd like to bring Adil into the conversation. And obviously at the USPTO, we recognize and talk a lot about the importance of protecting your IP. But to Samantha's point, right, there's always that cost, right? That cost to initial filing and the like. So. What is your take on this, right? I think there's studies that suggest that the likelihood of getting funding increases when you own IP that kind of matches your technology and fits with your business strategy. But how do you balance, and maybe how do you look to some of the federal funding sources? And maybe if you could talk about SBIR and something called TABA, is the discretionary technical and business assistance, and has that played a role in your journey and opened up access to IP and obtaining IP?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have, I believe, 4 patents now on the technology that goes into our hand, some of the new stuff that we're developing as well. And the very first one that we did actually spun out of the work that I was doing as a graduate student at the University of Illinois. And much to what Samantha was saying, when I was a graduate student, we were building earlier prototypes of this. We actually open sourced a lot of it because we wanted the community to be able to, have access to these devices and develop the same way that we started developing when we started using open source hardware from the other designers as well. And where one of the things that is really great about the US system in particular is that you have the option of starting with a provisional patent, right? So it's not that you have to drop like $20,000 to $30,000 immediately, but you've got a year that you can probably something around closer to $3,000 to $5,000. Put in a provisional patent that is more preliminary, at least to get your foot in the door. And that helps a lot with investors too. I mean, because they know that, okay, you guys are serious, right? I mean, it's not just that you're doing this on the side for fun or something like that, but this is technology that you actually think is worthy enough to actually put down the legitimate money to protect And much again to Samantha's point, it brings value to the company too, right? Like having a patent portfolio is what a lot of other businesses are looking at, and other potential like acquisitions are looking at in terms of how much value your company actually is. So it's definitely helped. I think it's helped on the SBIR front as well when we write our applications that, hey, we have a provisional patent on this, or we've got even better would be like an accepted or granted patent on some of the technology that we have. And we have we definitely use TABA funds mostly more on the marketing and like sales side of things in terms of business development, but also for some of the getting like the patent work out there. And the nice thing about the TABA is that it's more flexible in the usage of the funds that you get from like a traditional SBIR grant that's usually restricted to just like your project only. You can only spend it on R&D, but having that additional TABA allowed us to then explore the other side of the business that's not R&D, that is more related to like administrative functions like marketing and sales and patents.
Great, and thank you for that. And for those who aren't aware of the TABA funds, TABA is a program that provides additional funding for small businesses that are participating in SBIR programs to gain assistance, for example, with pursuing intellectual property protection. So it's one of the few sources of funding that you could devote to securing that IP protection. So we like to make folks aware of that. And you briefly mentioned as well the value of the provisional patents. And I wonder if just as a follow-up to that, if you could just talk maybe quickly about how something like getting a provisional patent is useful, for example, when someone like yourself might be exhibiting at the Consumer Electronics Show, now known as CES, and you maybe talk a little bit about some of your success there and what entrepreneurs should be aware of prior to exhibiting and making their inventions kind of publicly known.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we were at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, earlier this year, and I believe we were sponsored by the USPTO to go there and represent the SBIR companies that were over there. And it was an incredible opportunity too, because we got to show off a lot of the IP that we've developed over the years that was funded through these SBIR programs, and just show the world that this is what American innovation can do, right? We can break boards with this thing. You can control those with your muscles. You can feel from it. You can do all of these amazing things because of the technology that we've been developing from the SBIR funds that we were getting and the innovations that we were developing. And just to have a program available that we could actually exhibit this at CES was an incredible opportunity. We ended up winning a Best of CES award as well for just showing off a lot of the technology that we had with our patients who are using them.
Wonderful and well-deserved, and congratulations on that. And I'd like to go back to maybe to Suzanne now for this next question, and maybe just take a step back a little bit. I know we kind of got into some real specifics there about TABA and SBIR and different sources of funding, but I think there's this broader question about overall kind of financial literacy when you're a startup, when you're a small business. And so maybe if you could help us, to kind of take that step back and talk about from your perspective, some of the important milestones on your entrepreneurship journey that led to that enhanced financial literacy for you. And, what advice would you have for folks getting started out to increase that financial literacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of a big question. One of the sort of milestones actually just happened today. We were issued our second patent. So that's awesome. Speaking of, I literally got an email about that this morning. So that's amazing. For me as a founder, so this BADVR is the first tech company I've ever founded. So it's been a really big journey for me in terms of learning a lot about this stuff that I, maybe was aware of in passing, or, I knew of the broad strokes of it just working for previous startups. But the specificity required to really effectively run a business from a financial level was a lot greater than I had initially anticipated. And then also, while obviously I'm educated, there are a lot of financial aspects that I feel like I didn't learn in school, or that, I wasn't taught from my family. So it's been a lot, honestly. I've really honestly found that a lot of YouTube videos have helped me, just in Investopedia, just Googling stuff and really trying to understand all of the lingo, the words, all of these sorts of things have been very, very helpful. And then also, working together with people that I know in my network that have gone through the process of starting businesses before. And in my case, finding a co-founder that was a little bit more experienced on that end of things that could really come in and help with the financial knowledge and just the logistical knowledge of how to do things. And, working with different like accountants and tax preparers, of people that are really, well versed in this sort of thing that I am less versed in. I think as an entrepreneur, it's really important to understand what your own strengths and weaknesses are, what you do bring to the table, what your area of genius is, and where your weak points are, and really trying to, compensate for that in the way that you construct the team, whether or not you end up co-founding or being a single founder. I just think a lot of the times people want to try to do everything. I feel like most founders are sort of do-it-yourself type of people that really just want to try to solve everything on their own. And at some point, to really be successful, you have to let go of that. And part of letting go is knowing, okay, well, I'm really good at this thing. I'm really not so good at that thing. So I'm going to start delegating this out and find people who are really, really good at this and trust them to do, the thing that their genius and capabilities are. So, in terms of, pursuing funding, a lot of the times I think people don't think so much about the long-term cost of the funding that they raise. And that's been something from a high level on the financial literacy side that I've really considered a lot. Again, just because of the things that I have seen happen at previous startups, or the horror stories that I've heard of people, owners, founders being diluted and stuff like that. I think the sort of initial strategy, or the mindset that a lot of founders, especially tech founders, have is, I just want to raise a lot of money. I need to get that funding. I need to, go to VCs and do this pitching and just raise this funding right now. But they don't really think about the long-term cost of that funding, right? So once you sort of get on that sort of VC cycle, you're raising dilutive funding and you start going, and then you have to keep raising. That's sort of how it goes. You do this round and then you do that round and you keep adding on to it. And eventually it gets to a point where, because the funding is dilutive, you end up sort of losing, either control of the company or control of the product and the vision. And you end up sort of, losing, in my opinion, what's great about being a founder is having this vision and being able to make it real. So that's something that people don't often consider, and they'll just take whatever term sheet comes to them because they need the money, and they don't think about the terms of the term sheet. They just think about, well, how much can I raise? And it puts them, 3 or 4 or 5 years down, or, in or down the line, in a position that isn't quite advantageous to them. So for me, a lot of the big, financial literacy was learning that, planning that, and thinking about, as I mentioned earlier, finding different ways to capitalize and fund my business that would not potentially put me in a situation like that, or would put me in a better situation. So, a couple years down the line, if I am getting diluted, not as diluted as I could have been had I taken different terms at the beginning. So I think that's something that people also need to really think about from a financial literacy perspective when they are looking to capitalize their businesses. It's not just about what you can do today or what you can raise today or how you can spend the money today. It's about what is the long-term cost of that funding for you and for your company, and how can you sort of mitigate the downsides of whatever long-term, or if there are downsides of the funding, how can you mitigate those? Sorry. So, but yeah, other than that, I think that people don't often consider non-dilutive funding. And also someone mentioned crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. And that sort of is another one of those paths less taken that people should, in my opinion, look into. Like, all of these things are ways to capitalize your business. And, you know, everybody just sort of has this de facto standard that they're going for with, with the VCs. And I think there's like so many downsides to that people aren't aware of, or that they don't factor into things, and that it is worth it to spend the time thinking about alternative methods. You know, and I don't come from a background where I have a family that can just write, you know, $100,000 checks, and most people don't. So there are other ways of funding that aren't, because a lot of people are like, oh, just do friends and family. It's like, yeah, that's great if you have a lot of friends and family with tons of money. But there are other ways other than these like friends and family or angel things that you can get funded. And I think all of us here on the panel are proof of that. And it's worth it to spend the time to look into those and to pursue those for many different reasons. But
and thank you for sharing that, Suzanne. And I'd like to bring in Samantha maybe to build on that a little bit. And you know, Suzanne highlighted the value of, you know, just recognizing the cost of pursuing dilutive funding relative to non-dilutive funding. So maybe Samantha, kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit, from your background and experience, how do you position yourself? What are some of the specific things that you've done in your journey that have positioned you to get the best and the right kind of funding based on where you were in that journey?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Suzanne. And the raise, one thing we always take to fundraise. And I sold my last company, so I can appreciate, that modality as well. But, admittedly, and some of the resources I'm about to share, there was time that went into pursuing these opportunities, and they weren't, we don't bat 100%. So, there are failures along the way and time that sunk. But for us, I think I'm just really pragmatic, and also didn't have, the friends and family to support the vision that is Re3D. So for me, having had a company before, I was looking at the time I thought I'd spend raising versus opportunities I can pursue, even if they weren't 100% conversions to support the needs of our company. As I walk down maybe just a couple of resources that some of the people listening in, and thanks for the LinkedIn invites and the messages that are rolling in that have been helpful for us. I do want to touch on too, Eric's comments about multiple SBIRs and say, there is money out there, especially with, the open topics. Footstop for NASA Ignite. Google it now if you're looking for some of these. It's a really cool one that just dropped. Quick turnaround. We'll be applying to it. But I think it's really important to think about what you need, what your goals are for your company, what your technology needs are, what you may need to do to stay competitive. And then think about, how it might relate to these different agencies or opportunities. What can be really scary sometimes is if you pursue, we call it getting off your commercial glide path. So if you just are pursuing an opportunity to get funding, sometimes that can put you in a really tough position long-term or create tension with your company or a distraction. So, there's so much out there, as we all can share with you over LinkedIn and email, but please think about whether or not your tech really needs it. So with that in mind, the other thing that I've thought about a lot since the beginning is, being a socially driven company, we really wanted to make sure that what we were making was what the community wanted. And I think a really good validator for that is to see if people buy it. So while about half of our incoming money comes from grants and pitch competitions, some of the resources I'll highlight quickly as a starting point for anyone thinking about this, half of it comes from selling our product and services. So don't forget to sell your product. Otherwise, you're it's kind of similar to being caught up in that VC wagon, and just funding to fund to keep your team. So with that in mind, having that lean towards, particularly if it's hardware, making sure someone outside of my mom thought it had merit, and hearing what they said, good or bad, on Reddit. We used Kickstarter. We've also used multiple SBIRs through as of this week, potentially, which is exciting, our first phase 3 through multiple agencies. But In parallel, the other thing that we've done is pitch competition. So, I would say think about how you identify either gender or geography or what you're doing or your passion or your market. Google those search terms and pitch, and there's probably something that'll pop up from $5,000 to $1 million. And throw your name in the hat, because again, the more that you have to write out why you're doing something and what your needs are, the better you get at articulating that. And then you have a puzzle piece to maybe apply for something else. So, some are really small, some are really big, but we've leaned on pitch competitions a lot. Now we tend to focus on the larger ones, not only to get money, but because we don't have the network, it's so that if there's a judge that represents a market we want to penetrate, or someone that might attend that event that could be a future customer or partner, it's a way to get in front of them, to have that time and space. So we've done some where we won $1 million, best night of my life. And, we did one at South by Southwest this year where I had to eat a pepper and pitch a chili pepper and drink a gallon of milk for $2,500. But those were meaningful connections. And so, make sure that it's in line with what you need and where your technology is going. And then, we've talked a lot about SBIRs and in the previous talk, which is great, but know that I think Jennifer started to mention it or did mention it. Different states and territories have matching funds. So you can use all of these things to get more money out of your SBIR. So for example, when we won the $1 million, we had a NSF phase 2 at the time. And NSF phase 2 has what they call the phase 2B program. So it's a match that they can match against sales or investment or outside resources. So that $1 million unlocked another $500,000 from NSF to work on a further feature request we were already getting. And then within that, there are the states and territories may have matching grants if there's an extension of your technology. So we have our NSF award is held through our presence in Puerto Rico. So in addition to making a printer that can print with shredded up garbage, one of the requests that we've been getting in our phase 2 is to start to think about all of the hardware that's associated with that and putting it in net zero configuration. So the Puerto Rican Science and Research Trust came forward and said, we'll give you $200,000 as a territory match against your NSF to make a prototype where you start to look through that. And what's been really cool is because I'm a big believer in selling, even in the prototype stage, we've been selling this platform. It's now I think it's in all 6 continents, the printer that can print from waste. And we're already getting quotes and other awards for the GigaLab, the net zero solution that was part of our NSF territory match. Finally, I would say, one thing that I'm just learning is, we think a lot about the SBIR program, but there are national labs and other efforts by the US federal government, and maybe Eric and Adil and his PhD work can highlight some of them, but they also have resources against them. And I think Suzanne mentioned she was working with NIST or one of them. So, check out the Wells Fargo Accelerator. Look at NIST. We have a relationship with Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which has a relationship with the Department of Energy via Accreta. So we can have Oak Ridge employees working on hardware associated with our technology that the community needs. So check out pitch competitions, check out accelerators, consider crowdfunding as a way just to learn and to meet new people. Continue to pursue SBIR, STTRs through phase 3. And don't forget to sell your product, and know all those things can support each other. What NSF looks for, or for repeat SBIR, is to ensure that you have integrity and you're making use of taxpayer dollars, is prior sales, prior commercialization. So all of these efforts support each other, and it's just, again, one more tool in your toolkit if you decide to raise now or never or later, just as Suzanne's point, to increase the value of your company. But they're great ways to get input on where you should go, and also to maybe help you figure out where you need to pivot.
Fantastic information, Samantha, from the very practical of, make sure someone wants to buy your product, right? That you can't overlook that, to just a wealth of information about some non-traditional sources that people may not be considering, and especially the matching funding as well. And maybe I'd like Eric to weigh in on that a little bit. Given your experience of navigating some of the more traditional funding sources. Kind of building on what Samantha said, is there anything that you'd like to share about funding sources that have been impactful for you, or companies that you've worked with in the past that maybe you haven't heard us talk about today, or just that you would like to re-emphasize as we come to the last 5 minutes or so of our time together?
So this is a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. As an African American, you may know that we only get about 1% to 2% of all venture capital funding in the U.S., which is, horrendous. And that actually has gotten worse with the constriction in the capital markets in the last few months. I think it's dipped below 1%. So something that I've been experiencing, even though I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had, 3 successful companies. I pitch and don't get funding. I mean, it happens to me quite often. And so I've learned to be kind of adroit at bootstrapping and, the SIPR program, which I absolutely love, as a source of capital. But Samantha said something that was very important, and I want to make sure that everybody caught that. One of the best sources of funding is selling, and you get the right terms. And for example, if you pre-sell and you require like a 50% deposit, on your product, this is the best funding you can get. It's non-dilutive, and you're not paying on that, right? So it's not a loan. So and then overseas, it's even better because you've got organizations like Exim Bank and others that will actually give you terms and guarantee. And then when you do overseas business and they're buying your product, oftentimes they have to put a deposit, which could be substantial. So there's lots of ways to kind of bootstrap. And the other thing is, last thing I want to kind of mention, there are other programs, and it's just going through the maze of government. Could be challenging. But Samantha mentioned phase 2A. There's also something, phase 2B. There's also something called phase 2A that most people are not aware of. And what is a phase 2A? So if you have an HBCU, historically Black college university, on your team, you're now eligible for phase 2A funding, which could be, I think, at National Science Foundations up to $350,000. So being strategic, partner. But I think knowing the rules is going to be your friend. I'm sort of like a weirdo in that regards. I actually read constantly, and I've read the policy directive. I read the programs. I go through and I hunt and peck and find the different programs that are available at every agency and take full advantage of it, and try to take full advantage of every nickel you can get from these different programs. Most people don't know to even ask, right? So phase 2A, phase 2B, things like that, they're available.
Yeah, that's great perspective there, Eric, and thank you for sharing that with us. I'm glad you caught that and re-emphasized that. And unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time together, and I thought we might just do one final around the virtual room here. And maybe if each of you could take maybe just 30 seconds or so to share one piece of advice, perhaps something that you know now that you wish you could have told yourself, or that you wish your previous self knew when they were starting out on their journey. And so I'd invite Suzanne to kick us off.
Yeah, and actually this sort of ties in, with what was said previously. I mean, my biggest piece of advice for anybody, especially people who are interested in pursuing, potentially grant funding or cooperative agreement funding, is to read literally every single word on every single document and follow the directions exactly. Like, don't interpret it on your own. Don't think that you can read the first 2 sentences and you're like, oh, I got it. I'm not going to read the, following 35 pages of 12-point Arial font because I don't have the time to do that. And I'm just going to, just take it from here and I understand what's going on. So, I would, my biggest piece of advice is be incredibly detail oriented, read literally every single thing. I have found out about so many amazing opportunities just by reading stuff, just by taking the time to engage with what's available. And part of that, with the way that, grants and cooperative agreements are, is you have to read, you have to engage with it, you have to know exactly what every word says. And I actually received this advice myself early on in my grant process, but I didn't really take it to heart. And if I could do it again, I would absolutely take it to heart. And I would be very specific about what it is that I'm doing. I'm a big vision thinker. I think, in grand scale, trying to change the world scale, but you have to also be able to really come down to earth in the very, very detailed aspects of it as well. And that was challenging for me as a person. And I wish that, I had received, or actually I had received, but I wish I had taken that advice to heart and followed it. The other thing that I wish that, I would have done or, earlier in my career is trusted more in the fact that people in the world were interested in what I was doing. I just made this assumption that, I wanted to do the things that I wanted to do and I wanted to change the world, but I didn't think that anyone else cared about it. I really didn't think that anyone else would believe in me. Or I really didn't think that they would, even want to hear what it is that I had to say. I had spent, the early part of my career really sort of feeling like a houseplant, like something that's just there, but nobody really cares about it. No one wants to engage with it. And I had all these things inside of myself, these ideas and visions and hopes and dreams. And I just didn't think anybody cared or wanted to hear them. So I wish that I had believed in myself a little bit more earlier in the game. I wish that I had believed that the world did care about what my thoughts were and that they did care about the vision. Because it would have really, I guess, sort of inspired me more sooner to pursue the things that I wanted to do, and also would have made me more willing to open up and share those things and, reach out to people and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Does this match up with, what this solicitation is? Is this something that you would think about as fundable? And that also is something that you can do with the seed fund. You can sort of run your ideas past them to sort of see if it is within the sort of realm of what it is they're interested in funding. So, I those two things really read every word, be very detail oriented, follow the directions exactly, and then also believe in yourself and believe that the world does want to hear what you have to say. And the world absolutely needs you to come in and do what it is that you want to do and what you believe in doing. Really needs you to help change it. So every voice is important. Yours is important. And, I would want everybody to believe that.
Wonderful. And what an inspiring way maybe to conclude the session today. I think Deepak is about to tell us that we need to wrap this session up since we're just about at time. So I want to extend my sincere thanks to each of our panelists. I felt like we could go on for another 50 minutes. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your incredibly busy lives to share your insight and expertise with this audience. And Deepak, I'll let you transition to our next session.